Question 1. To address the challenge of managing client relationships and transaction progress effectively while adhering to Singapore's strict data protection and estate agency regulations, a licensed real estate salesperson is evaluating different software solutions. Which approach best mitigates the risk of data breaches and ensures regulatory compliance? Option A. Utilizing a free, general-purpose cloud-based spreadsheet application to store all client contact information and track transaction milestones. Option B. Implementing a reputable industry-specific customer relationship management (CRM) system known for its robust data security features, including encryption and access controls, and ensuring it aligns with Singapore's data protection principles. Option C. Employing a popular, consumer-grade project management tool that is not tailored for real estate and has unclear data privacy policies. Option D. Relying exclusively on email and manual notes stored on a personal laptop, without a centralized, secure data management system. Correct answer is B. Implementing a reputable, industry-specific customer relationship management (CRM) system known for its robust data security features, including encryption and access controls, and ensuring it aligns with Singapore's data protection principles. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the efficient use of technology with the paramount duty of client confidentiality and data security, as mandated by Singaporean real estate regulations. Real estate salespersons in Singapore are entrusted with sensitive client information, and the improper handling of this data through software can lead to breaches, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties under the Estate Agents Act and its subsidiary legislation. The risk lies in the potential for unauthorized access, data loss, or misuse of information stored within these digital tools. Careful judgment is required to select and implement tools that are both effective and compliant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves selecting and utilizing a customer relationship management (CRM) system that is specifically designed for the real estate industry in Singapore and offers robust data security features, including encryption and access controls. This approach aligns with the principles of data protection and client confidentiality expected of licensed estate agents and salespersons under the Estate Agents Act. A compliant CRM allows for organized client management, efficient communication, and secure storage of personal data, minimizing the risk of breaches. Furthermore, it facilitates compliance with any record-keeping requirements stipulated by the Council for Estate Agencies. C. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using a generic, free cloud-based spreadsheet application for managing all client contact details and transaction progress presents significant regulatory and ethical failures. Such applications often lack the advanced security protocols, encryption, and audit trails necessary to protect sensitive personal data, making it vulnerable to unauthorized access or data loss. This contravenes the duty of care owed to clients and the requirements for data protection under Singaporean law. Employing a widely available, consumer-grade project management tool that is not specifically designed for real estate transactions and lacks clear data privacy policies is also professionally unacceptable. While it might offer organizational benefits, its suitability for handling confidential client information and transaction details is questionable. The absence of industry-specific compliance features and robust security measures increases the risk of data breaches and noncompliance with the Estate Agents Act. Relying solely on email correspondence and personal notes stored on a local computer without any centralized, secure system for client data management is inefficient and poses a high risk of data loss or unauthorized access. This method lacks the structured approach to data security and record-keeping required by regulatory bodies, potentially leading to difficulties in retrieving information and demonstrating compliance if audited. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach when selecting and implementing real estate software. This involves 1. Identifying the specific data to be managed, client personal information, transaction details, financial data. 2. Assessing the regulatory requirements for data protection and record-keeping in Singapore, particularly those outlined by the CEA and the Estate Agents Act. 3. Evaluating the security features of potential software solutions, prioritizing those with encryption, access controls, audit trails, and compliance certifications. 4. Considering the ease of use and integration with other essential tools like the multiple listing service MLS, and transaction management platforms. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating security protocols and software to ensure ongoing compliance and protection of client data. Question 2. Examination of the data shows that a prospective buyer in Singapore is seeking a home loan and has provided you with their financial information, including income figures that appear to be significantly higher than what supporting documents suggest. The buyer is eager to proceed with the loan application and has asked you to submit the information as is, suggesting that lenders often approve loans with slightly inflated figures. What is the most appropriate course of action for a licensed real estate salesperson in this situation? Option A. Submit the loan application with the buyer's provided income figures, as requested, to facilitate a quicker approval process. Option B. Encourage the buyer to provide a higher valuation for the property than what is realistically achievable to secure a larger loan amount. Option C. Verify the income figures with the buyer and request supporting documentation to ensure accuracy before submitting the loan application to the lender. Option D. Advise the buyer to omit details about their existing debts to present a more favorable debt-to-income ratio to the lender. Correct answer is C. Verify the income figures with the buyer and request supporting documentation to ensure accuracy before submitting the loan application to the lender. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to balance their duty to their client with the lender's need for accurate and complete information during the loan underwriting process. Misrepresenting information, even with the client's encouragement, can lead to serious regulatory breaches and ethical compromises, potentially jeopardizing the loan approval and the salesperson's license. The salesperson must navigate the client's desire for a quick approval against the lender's stringent risk assessment requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves diligently verifying all information provided by the client and ensuring its accuracy before submitting it to the lender. This includes cross-referencing details with supporting documentation and, if discrepancies arise, discussing them transparently with the client and seeking clarification or correction. This approach aligns with the Council for Estate Agencies (C) guidelines in Singapore, which mandate honesty, integrity, and diligence in all dealings. Specifically, Regulation 10 of the Estate Agents, Licensing and Conduct regulations requires salespersons to act with due diligence and not mislead any party. By ensuring accuracy, the salesperson upholds their fiduciary duty to the client and maintains the integrity of the loan application process, thereby avoiding potential breaches of trust and regulatory noncompliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Submitting the loan application with the client's inflated income figures without verification is ethically unsound and a direct violation of the CEA's principles of honesty and integrity. This misrepresentation constitutes a breach of Regulation 10, as it fails to act with due diligence and actively misleads the lender. Such an action could lead to loan rejection, financial penalties for the client, and disciplinary action against the salesperson, including license suspension or revocation. Suggesting the client omit details about their existing debts to present a more favorable debt-to-income ratio is also a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This is a form of deception that directly contravenes the requirement to provide accurate information. It not only misleads the lender, but also exposes the client to significant financial risk if the loan is approved based on false pretenses. This action would be considered a breach of the salesperson's duty of care and could result in severe penalties under the Estate Agents Act. Encouraging the client to provide a higher valuation for the property than what is realistically achievable, with the intention of securing a larger loan amount, is another form of misrepresentation. This manipulates the loan-to-value ratio and deceives the lender about the true worth of the collateral. This conduct violates the principles of fair dealing and honesty expected of licensed salespersons and could lead to severe disciplinary actions by the CEA. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the client's financial situation and the lender's requirements. Second, meticulously verify all provided information against supporting documents. Third, if discrepancies are found, engage in open and honest communication with the client to rectify them. Fourth, prioritize ethical conduct and regulatory compliance above all else, even if it means potentially delaying or complicating the loan approval process. The ultimate goal is to facilitate a loan that is appropriate for the client's financial capacity and based on truthful information, thereby protecting both the client and the salesperson from adverse consequences. Question 3. Research into Singapore's property market has highlighted the importance of fair housing practices. A seller instructs their appointed real estate salesperson to only market their condominium unit to potential buyers of a specific ethnic background, stating it is their personal preference for the neighborhood's character. The salesperson is aware that Singapore has laws against discrimination in property transactions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Politely inform the seller that their request cannot be fulfilled due to Singapore's laws prohibiting discrimination based on race or national origin in property transactions, and educate them on these regulations. Option B. Proceed with marketing the property broadly without directly addressing the seller's discriminatory preference, hoping to avoid conflict. Option C. Subtly filter potential buyers, presenting only those of the specified ethnic background to the seller, while not explicitly stating this filtering process. Option D. Agree to the seller's request and actively seek buyers who match the specified ethnic background to ensure a quick sale. The correct answer is A. Politely inform the seller that their request cannot be fulfilled due to Singapore's laws prohibiting discrimination based on race or national origin in property transactions, and educate them on these regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson to navigate a situation where a client's stated preference directly conflicts with Singapore's fair housing principles, specifically the principles against discrimination based on race or national origin, as enshrined in the Residential Property Act and its associated regulations. The salesperson must uphold their professional and legal obligations while also attempting to satisfy their client's request, creating a delicate ethical and legal tightrope. Careful judgment is required to avoid discriminatory practices while maintaining client relationships. The best professional approach involves politely but firmly explaining to the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to legal and ethical prohibitions against discrimination in property transactions. The salesperson must educate the client on the relevant laws in Singapore that prohibit discrimination based on race or national origin when selling or renting property. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, ensuring that the salesperson does not facilitate or engage in discriminatory practices. It upholds the integrity of the real estate profession and protects vulnerable groups from unfair treatment, aligning with the spirit and letter of Singapore's fair housing regulations. An approach that involves subtly steering potential buyers away from the property based on their race or national origin is ethically and legally unacceptable. This constitutes indirect discrimination, which is still a violation of fair housing principles. It undermines the salesperson's duty to act with integrity and honesty, and exposes them to potential penalties under Singaporean law. Another unacceptable approach is to agree to the client's request and attempt to find buyers who meet the discriminatory criteria. This directly contravenes the salesperson's obligation to adhere to anti-discrimination laws. By actively seeking to fulfill a discriminatory request, the salesperson becomes complicit in discriminatory practices, which carries significant legal repercussions and damages their professional reputation. Finally, an approach that involves ignoring the client's request and proceeding with marketing the property without addressing the discriminatory undertones is also problematic. While it might seem like a way to avoid direct confrontation, it fails to educate the client and address the root of the discriminatory preference. This passive approach does not actively uphold fair housing principles and misses an opportunity to guide the client towards lawful and ethical practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and legal principles at play. In this case, fair housing and anti-discrimination laws are paramount. The next step is to assess the client's request against these principles. If a conflict arises, the professional must prioritize legal and ethical compliance. This involves clear, direct, and respectful communication with the client, explaining the legal boundaries and offering alternative, lawful solutions. Maintaining professional integrity and upholding the law should always supersede a client's discriminatory preferences. Question 4. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Singaporean real estate salesperson when a potential buyer expresses interest in a property, but indicates they are willing to overlook a known, significant structural issue if the price is right? Option A. Urge the client to accept the buyer's offer quickly to secure the sale and commission, downplaying the significance of the structural issue to avoid deterring the buyer. Option B. Fully disclose the known structural issue to the potential buyer. Advise the client on the implications of selling a property with such an issue, and facilitate an informed decision by both parties. Option C. Proceed with negotiating the sale at the highest possible price without explicitly detailing the structural issue, assuming the buyer's willingness to overlook it means it's not a material fact. Option D. Inform the buyer that the structural issue is minor and can be easily fixed, even if the salesperson knows it requires substantial repairs, to expedite the negotiation process. The correct answer is B. Fully disclose the known structural issue to the potential buyer. Advise the client on the implications of selling a property with such an issue, and facilitate an informed decision by both parties. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to balance the fiduciary duty owed to their client with the potential for a quick sale and commission. The salesperson must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure transparency and fair dealing, adhering strictly to the principles of the Council for Estate Agencies, see Code of Practice. The best approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests and ensuring full disclosure, even if it means a potentially longer selling period. This aligns with the salesperson's duty to act honestly and with integrity, and to avoid misleading or deceiving any party. Specifically, the salesperson must disclose all material facts that could affect a buyer's decision, including any known defects or issues with the property. This proactive and transparent communication safeguards the client's interests and upholds the salesperson's professional reputation and compliance with CEA guidelines. An approach that focuses solely on securing the highest possible offer without fully disclosing known issues, even if the buyer is willing to overlook them, is ethically problematic. It risks misleading the buyer and potentially violating the salesperson's duty of care and honesty. Similarly, an approach that pressures the client to accept an offer quickly without ensuring they have all necessary information to make an informed decision disregards the client's autonomy and the salesperson's fiduciary responsibilities. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the salesperson's commission over the client's informed consent and best interests is a clear breach of ethical conduct and regulatory expectations in Singapore. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with identifying their primary fiduciary duty to the client. This involves understanding all material facts about the property and the client's objectives. Next, they must consider the potential impact of these facts on prospective buyers and ensure full, honest, and timely disclosure. Any potential conflicts of interest must be managed transparently. The salesperson should then advise the client based on a comprehensive understanding of the market and the property's condition, empowering the client to make an informed decision. Question 5. The performance metrics show a persistent decline in sales volume for properties listed by your agency in the Jurong West District of Singapore over the past 2 quarters. As a licensed real estate salesperson, what is the most appropriate course of action to address this trend? Option A. Conduct a detailed market analysis of the Jurong West District, including competitor activity, recent transaction prices, and demographic shifts, and consult with the Council for Estate Agencies, C, for any relevant guidance on market trends or best practices. Option B. Immediately launch a series of aggressive, discounted marketing campaigns for all listed properties in Jurong West without further investigation into the cause of the sales decline. Option C. Advise clients to withdraw their properties from the market in Jurong West, citing general market downturns without providing specific evidence or analysis. Option D. Focus marketing efforts solely on other districts where sales performance is stronger, effectively deprioritizing the Jurong West listings. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed market analysis of the Jurong West District, including competitor activity, recent transaction prices, and demographic shifts, and consult with the Council for Estate Agencies, C, for any relevant guidance on market trends or best practices. Explanation. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of underperforming sales in a specific district within Singapore. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson to not only identify the issue, but also to take appropriate action that aligns with the Estate Agents Act (EA) and its associated regulations in Singapore. A salesperson must balance business objectives with their legal and ethical obligations to clients and the public. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the underperformance, coupled with proactive engagement with the relevant authorities and stakeholders. This includes reviewing market data, understanding local economic factors, and consulting with the Council for Estate Agencies, C, for guidance if necessary. This approach is correct because it demonstrates due diligence, a commitment to ethical practice, and adherence to the EAA's requirements for professional conduct and market integrity. It prioritizes understanding the root cause of the underperformance before implementing solutions, thereby safeguarding client interests and maintaining the reputation of the profession. An approach that involves immediately implementing aggressive, unverified marketing strategies without understanding the underlying issues is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the potential systemic problems contributing to underperformance and could lead to misrepresentation or misleading advertising, violating the EAA's provisions against unethical sales practices. Another unacceptable approach is to ignore the performance metrics, assuming they are temporary fluctuations. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a failure to act in the best interests of clients who may be affected by a stagnant market. It also neglects the salesperson's duty to stay informed about market conditions and to advise clients accordingly, as mandated by professional standards. Finally, an approach that involves blaming external factors without any internal review or attempt to understand the situation is also professionally deficient. While external factors can influence sales, a responsible salesperson must conduct a comprehensive analysis to identify all contributing elements, both internal and external, to provide effective advice and solutions. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with objective data analysis, followed by consultation with regulatory bodies and experienced colleagues when faced with performance challenges. This ensures that actions taken are informed, ethical, and compliant with all relevant legislation. Question 6. The control framework reveals that a real estate salesperson in Singapore is approached by a client interested in purchasing a property. The client states they intend to operate a small artisanal bakery from the premises. The seller has described the property as a versatile commercial space. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Singapore's property regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Immediately advise the client on the suitability of the property for their intended business, assuming versatile commercial space implies it can accommodate a bakery, and proceed with facilitating the transaction. Option B. Rely solely on the seller's description of the property as a versatile commercial space, and the client's stated intention to operate a bakery, proceeding with the transaction as long as the client is satisfied. Option C. Advise the client that, while the property is described as commercial, they should proceed at their own risk regarding the specific use as a bakery, as the salesperson cannot guarantee its legality. Option D. Conduct independent verification with the Urban Redevelopment Authority, URA, or relevant authorities to confirm the property's current zoning and permitted uses, and then advise the client based on official findings. The correct answer is A. Immediately advise the client on the suitability of the property for their intended business, assuming versatile commercial space implies it can accommodate a bakery, and proceed with facilitating the transaction. Explanation. The control framework reveals that real estate salespersons in Singapore must possess a nuanced understanding of different property types to effectively advise clients and comply with regulations. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a client's stated intention for a property might not align with the property's actual zoning or intended use, leading to potential regulatory breaches and financial repercussions for both the client and the salesperson. Careful judgment is required to identify and address these discrepancies proactively. The best professional approach involves thoroughly verifying the property's classification and zoning regulations with the relevant Singaporean authorities, such as the Urban Redevelopment Authority, URA, or Housing and Development Board, HDB, before proceeding with any advice or transaction. This approach is correct because it prioritizes compliance with Singapore's planning and land use laws, which are paramount in real estate dealings. By confirming the property's designation as residential, commercial, industrial, or agricultural, the salesperson ensures that the client's intended use is permissible and that all transactions adhere to the Estate Agents Act and its subsidiary legislation, safeguarding against misrepresentation and potential penalties. This proactive verification demonstrates due diligence and upholds the ethical duty of care owed to the client. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the seller's or current occupant's description of the property's use without independent verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the legal framework governing property classification in Singapore. The Estate Agents Act mandates that salespersons act with integrity and diligence, which includes ensuring the accuracy of information provided to clients. Failure to verify zoning and intended use could lead to the client purchasing a property for an illegal purpose, resulting in enforcement actions from the authorities and potential legal liabilities for all parties involved. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a property's appearance or historical use automatically dictates its current permissible use. For instance, a building that has historically housed a small retail shop might now be zoned exclusively for residential purposes, or vice versa. Proceeding without confirming current zoning is a failure to adhere to the principle of know your property and can lead to significant client dissatisfaction and regulatory noncompliance. Finally, advising a client to proceed with a purchase based on a verbal assurance from the seller about the property's use, without obtaining written confirmation or verifying with official sources, is also a flawed strategy. This lacks the necessary documentation and official sanction required by Singaporean property law and ethical guidelines, exposing both the client and the salesperson to undue risk. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives, followed by rigorous verification of property details against official Singaporean land use and zoning regulations. This includes consulting relevant government agencies and ensuring all information is documented. If discrepancies arise, the professional must clearly communicate these to the client and advise on the legal implications and permissible uses before any commitment is made. Question 7. Strategic planning requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to accurately assess a property's development potential. A client is interested in purchasing a commercial property in the Central Business District, CBD, with the intention of converting it into a mixed-use development including residential units. What is the most appropriate initial step for the salesperson to take to advise the client on the feasibility of this conversion, strictly adhering to Singapore's land use regulations? Option A. Consult the latest URA master plan and relevant planning guidelines to determine the specific zoning designation and permitted uses for the property, and investigate any proposed amendments or development control guidelines affecting the site. Option B. Advise the client that conversion to mixed use is likely feasible given the property's prime CBD location and the general trend towards urban densification. Option C. Recommend the client speak with local business owners and other real estate agents in the CBD to gauge general sentiment on mixed-use developments. Option D. Inform the client that as long as the proposed residential units are of high quality and meet market demand, the conversion should be permissible. The correct answer is A. Consult the latest URA master plan and relevant planning guidelines to determine the specific zoning designation and permitted uses for the property, and investigate any proposed amendments or development control guidelines affecting the site. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to navigate the complexities of the Urban Redevelopment Authorities, URA, master plan and its implications for property development. Misinterpreting or disregarding zoning regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, financial losses for clients, and damage to the salesperson's reputation and license. Careful judgment is required to ensure all advice given is accurate and compliant with Singapore's land use planning framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly consulting the URA master plan and relevant planning guidelines to understand the specific zoning and permitted uses for the subject property. This approach ensures that the advice provided to the client is accurate, compliant with Singapore's land use regulations, and reflects the potential development opportunities or constraints. Specifically, the salesperson should verify the current zoning designation, any future land use proposals indicated in the master plan, and any specific development control guidelines applicable to that zone. This proactive due diligence is mandated by the Estate Agents Act and its subsidiary legislation, which require agents to act with integrity and diligence, and to provide accurate information to clients. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the client based solely on past development trends in the vicinity without verifying the current URA master plan is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks providing outdated or incorrect information, as zoning regulations and future land use plans can change. It fails to meet the duty of care owed to the client, and violates the requirement to provide accurate information under Singaporean real estate regulations. Assuming that any type of development is permissible as long as it is marketable, without checking the URA master plan, is a serious regulatory failure. Marketability does not override zoning laws. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of Singapore's stringent land use planning system and could lead the client into illegal development activities, exposing both the client and the salesperson to penalties. Relying on informal discussions with local community members or other agents about potential zoning changes without official confirmation from the URA is also professionally unsound. While local insights can be helpful, official URA documentation is the definitive source for zoning information. Relying on hearsay can lead to misinformation and non-compliance with the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to advising clients on property development potential. This involves 1. Identifying the property's location, 2. Accessing and meticulously reviewing the official URA master plan and any relevant supplementary planning guidelines, 3. Cross-referencing the master plan information with the client's development aspirations, 4. Clearly communicating the permitted uses, development potential, and any restrictions to the client, emphasizing that official URA guidelines are paramount, 5. Advising the client to seek professional planning advice for complex development proposals. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals a promising commercial property investment opportunity in Singapore, with projections indicating strong rental yields and capital appreciation. Considering the regulatory environment and ethical obligations of a real estate salesperson in Singapore, which of the following approaches best represents a prudent and professional method for advising a client on this investment? Option A. Advise the client based solely on the current market conditions, without considering potential future shifts in government property policies or economic trends. Option B. Focus primarily on the projected rental yields and capital appreciation figures, as these are the key indicators of investment success. Option C. Emphasize the positive aspects of the investment and minimize any discussion of potential risks to ensure client confidence and facilitate a quick transaction. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates market volatility, economic factors, and potential regulatory changes impacting Singapore's real estate market, alongside financial projections. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates market volatility, economic factors, and potential regulatory changes impacting Singapore's real estate market, alongside financial projections. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential investment opportunity in a commercial property in Singapore. The challenge for a real estate salesperson lies in advising a client on the most prudent approach to assessing the investment's viability, balancing potential returns with inherent risks, while adhering to Singapore's regulatory framework for property transactions and professional conduct. This requires a thorough understanding of risk assessment methodologies beyond mere financial projections. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates market volatility, economic downturns, and regulatory changes specific to Singapore's real estate sector. This includes evaluating the property's location, tenant profile, lease agreements, and potential for capital appreciation or depreciation, all within the context of the Urban Redevelopment Authority (URA) guidelines and the Council for Estate Agencies (C) Code of Conduct. A salesperson must proactively identify and quantify potential risks, such as changes in government policies affecting property ownership or rental yields, and advise the client on mitigation strategies. This aligns with the CEA's emphasis on professional diligence and providing clients with accurate, unbiased advice to make informed decisions, thereby upholding the integrity of the real estate profession. An approach that solely focuses on projected rental yields and capital appreciation without a detailed analysis of market risks, such as potential oversupply in the commercial sector or shifts in economic indicators impacting business demand for space, is insufficient. This overlooks the regulatory requirement to provide a balanced view of investment prospects and fails to adequately protect the client's interests from unforeseen market downturns. Another inadequate approach would be to disregard the impact of potential changes in Singapore's property cooling measures or foreign ownership regulations on the investment's long-term viability. Such an oversight neglects the salesperson's duty to consider all relevant factors that could affect the investment's performance and could lead to a misrepresentation of the investment's true risk profile. Finally, an approach that prioritizes securing the transaction over a thorough risk assessment by downplaying potential negative factors or failing to disclose them transparently is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This contravenes the CEA's principles of honesty and integrity and exposes both the salesperson and the client to significant professional and financial repercussions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's risk tolerance and investment objectives. This is followed by a multifaceted analysis of the investment, incorporating financial projections, market dynamics, and a robust assessment of all potential risks, both internal and external to the property. Transparency and clear communication of these risks, along with potential mitigation strategies, are paramount throughout the advisory process. Question 9. System analysis indicates that a real estate salesperson in Singapore has agreed to a commission of 2% of the final sale price for a property. The property was initially listed at $1,200,000 and after negotiations was sold for $1,150,000. The salesperson is preparing to calculate their commission. What is the correct commission amount? Option A, $25,000 based on the initial listing price. Option B, $23,000 rounded up from $22,987.50. Option C, $24,000. Option D, $23,000. The correct answer is D, $23,000. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misrepresentation and the critical role of a real estate salesperson in accurately conveying property information to potential buyers. The salesperson's duty is to act in the best interest of their client, while also adhering to the ethical and legal obligations under the Estate Agents Act E and its subsidiary legislation in Singapore. Miscalculating commission can lead to disputes, damage to reputation, and potential disciplinary action from the Council for Estate Agencies. C. The best approach involves a meticulous and transparent calculation of the commission based on the agreed-upon terms and the final sale price, ensuring all parties are informed and agree with the calculation before it is finalized. This aligns with the salesperson's duty to act honestly and competently, as stipulated by the EA and CEA's guidelines on professional conduct. Specifically, Section 48 of the EA prohibits misrepresentation, and the CEA's Code of Ethics emphasizes the importance of transparency and accuracy in all dealings. By confirming the commission calculation with the seller and ensuring it reflects the agreed percentage of the final sale price, the salesperson upholds these principles. An incorrect approach would be to simply apply the agreed percentage to the initial advertised price, even if the final sale price is lower. This fails to accurately reflect the commission earned on the actual transaction and could be seen as an attempt to overcharge or misrepresent the commission structure, violating the salesperson's duty of honesty and potentially contravening Section 48 of the EA. Another incorrect approach is to round up the commission to the nearest dollar amount without explicit agreement from the seller. While seemingly minor, this constitutes a deviation from the agreed-upon percentage calculation and lacks transparency. It can lead to a perception of unfairness and a breach of trust, as the salesperson is not strictly adhering to the contractual terms of their commission. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to deduct the commission from the buyer's deposit without prior written consent from both the seller and the buyer. This is a serious breach of trust and potentially illegal, as the deposit is typically held in trust and disbursed according to the sale and purchase agreement. Such an action could lead to legal repercussions and severe disciplinary action from the CEA for misappropriation of funds and breach of professional conduct. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Clearly understanding and documenting the commission agreement with the seller. 2. Performing calculations based on the final, agreed-upon sale price. 3. Communicating the commission calculation clearly to the seller for their confirmation. 4. Ensuring all transactions are conducted ethically and in compliance with the Estate Agents Act and CEA guidelines. Question 10. System analysis indicates that a real estate salesperson in Singapore is approached by a buyer who is interested in a property listed by the same salesperson's agency. The buyer expresses a strong desire to purchase this specific property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to ethically and legally navigate this situation? Option A. Represent the buyer without disclosing the agency relationship to the seller, assuming that since the property is listed by the agency, the seller is aware of potential buyer interest. Option B. Obtain informed consent from both the seller and the buyer for dual agency, clearly explaining the potential conflicts and limitations of representation before proceeding. Option C. Immediately inform the seller that the buyer is willing to pay the asking price and encourage the seller to accept the offer to expedite the transaction, without mentioning the buyer's specific interest in the property. Option D. Proceed with representing the buyer exclusively, as the buyer has initiated the interest in the property, and inform the seller of the buyer's interest without further disclosure of the dual agency. The correct answer is B. Obtain informed consent from both the seller and the buyer for dual agency, clearly explaining the potential conflicts and limitations of representation before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict of interest that arises when a salesperson represents both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. Navigating this situation requires strict adherence to the Estate Agents Act and its associated regulations in Singapore to ensure transparency, fairness, and to avoid misleading parties. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the fiduciary duties owed to both parties, which can be difficult to achieve without compromising the interests of one or both. The best professional approach involves obtaining informed consent from both the seller and the buyer for dual agency, clearly outlining the potential conflicts and limitations of representation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of transparency and informed consent mandated by the EA Act. Specifically, Section 24 of the EA Act requires agents to disclose any potential conflict of interest to all parties involved. By obtaining written consent after full disclosure, the salesperson ensures that both parties are aware of the dual agency situation and its implications, thereby mitigating the risk of misrepresentation or breach of duty. This proactive step allows parties to make an informed decision about whether to proceed with the dual agency arrangement. Representing both parties without obtaining explicit, informed consent from both the seller and the buyer is an incorrect approach. This failure violates the duty of loyalty and the obligation to act in the best interests of each client, as stipulated by common law agency principles, and implicitly supported by the EA Act's emphasis on fair dealing. Such an action could lead to accusations of misrepresentation and a breach of fiduciary duty, potentially resulting in disciplinary action from the Council for Estate Agencies, (C). Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the interests of one party over the other without the explicit agreement of both. For instance, subtly steering the buyer towards accepting a higher price or encouraging the seller to accept a lower offer to expedite the transaction, without full disclosure and consent, constitutes a breach of duty to the disadvantaged party. This undermines the principle of acting impartially and in the best interests of all clients when dual agency is in play, and contravenes the spirit of fair dealing expected under Singaporean real estate regulations. Finally, attempting to conceal the dual agency relationship from either the seller or the buyer is a serious ethical and regulatory failing. This deception directly violates the transparency requirements and the duty to disclose material information, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and integrity in real estate transactions under the EA Act. Such concealment can lead to severe penalties, including fines and loss of license. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. When faced with a potential dual agency situation, the first step is to identify the conflict of interest. Subsequently, the salesperson must assess whether dual agency is permissible under the EA Act and CEA guidelines. If it is, the next crucial step is to obtain full, informed, and written consent from all parties involved after clearly explaining the implications and limitations. If such consent cannot be obtained, or if the conflict is too significant to manage ethically, the salesperson should decline to act as a dual agent and instead recommend that each party engage separate agents. Question 11. The audit findings indicate that a real estate salesperson in Singapore has been consistently advising clients to sign open listing agreements for their properties, citing it as the simplest option. What is the most professionally sound approach for the salesperson to take when discussing listing agreements with a potential client? Option A. Recommend an exclusive agency agreement, explaining that it offers a balance between the client's ability to find a buyer and the salesperson's potential to earn a commission. Option B. Focus solely on the client's desire to minimize costs, suggesting that an open listing is the best option as it guarantees no commission will be paid if the client finds the buyer. Option C. Advise the client that an open listing is the simplest and most common agreement, ensuring the client can sell the property themselves without paying commission. Option D. Clearly explain the benefits and drawbacks of exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listing agreements, recommending the exclusive right to sell as it provides the most comprehensive protection for the salesperson's commission and encourages dedicated marketing efforts. The correct answer is D. Clearly explain the benefits and drawbacks of exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listing agreements, recommending the exclusive right to sell as it provides the most comprehensive protection for the salesperson's commission and encourages dedicated marketing efforts. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential misinterpretation of the salesperson's role and responsibilities concerning listing agreements. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the salesperson to understand and articulate the legal and financial implications of different listing types, ensuring the client makes an informed decision that also protects the salesperson's earned commission. A failure to do so can lead to disputes and ethical breaches. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining the benefits and drawbacks of exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listing agreements, recommending the exclusive right to sell as it provides the most comprehensive protection for the salesperson's commission and encourages dedicated marketing efforts. This approach is correct because the exclusive right to sell agreement under Singaporean real estate regulation ensures the salesperson is entitled to a commission regardless of who finds the buyer. This reflects the significant investment of time, resources, and expertise the salesperson dedicates to marketing the property. Ethically, it aligns with the principle of fair compensation for services rendered, recommending an open listing as the simplest option, as described in the first incorrect approach, is professionally unsound. While it may seem simple, it significantly undermines the salesperson's commission entitlement. Under an open listing, any agent who introduces a buyer can claim commission, and if the seller finds the buyer themselves, no commission is paid. Failure to secure commission for the salesperson's marketing efforts is a significant ethical and professional failing, as it does not adequately compensate for the work undertaken. Advising an exclusive agency agreement, as in the second incorrect approach, is also problematic. While it offers some commission protection, it still leaves the salesperson vulnerable if the seller finds the buyer independently. This creates a scenario where the salesperson's efforts might not be rewarded, potentially leading to dissatisfaction and disputes. It also presents a conflict of interest for the seller, focusing solely on the client's desire to minimize costs and suggesting an open listing, as in the third incorrect approach, is ethically irresponsible. While cost minimization is a client concern, it cannot override the fundamental need for a clear, enforceable agreement that fairly compensates the salesperson for their services. This approach prioritizes short-term client satisfaction over long-term professional integrity and legal compliance. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and transparency. This involves a thorough explanation of each listing agreement type, emphasizing the commission structure, the salesperson's obligations, and the client's rights and responsibilities. The salesperson should then guide the client towards the agreement that best meets their objectives, while ensuring their own commission is secured through a legally sound and ethically transparent contract. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that a real estate salesperson in Singapore, representing a seller, discovers that the prospective buyer is a close relative of the salesperson. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take to uphold their professional and ethical obligations? Option A. Proceed with negotiations, assuming the relationship will not influence the outcome, and inform the seller only after the sale is concluded. Option B. Immediately disclose the relationship to the seller and seek clear written instructions on how to proceed with the transaction. Option C. Inform the seller of the relationship and then proactively negotiate a reduced price with the buyer, considering it a family discount. Option D. Inform the prospective buyer that the transaction cannot proceed due to the familial relationship. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the relationship to the seller and seek clear written instructions on how to proceed with the transaction. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure fair dealing with all parties involved, adhering strictly to the Estate Agents Act and its associated regulations. The salesperson must balance their duty to their client with the overarching requirement of transparency and honesty in property transactions. Careful judgment is required to avoid any perception or reality of impropriety. The best professional approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to both the seller and the prospective buyer, and seeking clear instructions from the seller on how to proceed. This approach is correct because it upholds the salesperson's fiduciary duty to their client, the seller, by being transparent about a situation that could impact the transaction's fairness. It also aligns with the ethical principles of honesty and integrity mandated by the Council for Estate Agencies, C. Guidelines, which emphasize avoiding misrepresentation and ensuring all parties are fully informed. By seeking explicit instruction, the salesperson demonstrates a commitment to acting in the seller's best interest while acknowledging the buyer's position. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with negotiations without informing the seller of the buyer's relationship to the salesperson. This is professionally unacceptable as it breaches the salesperson's duty of utmost good faith and loyalty to their client, the seller. It creates a significant conflict of interest and could lead to accusations of favoritism or even collusion, violating the principles of fair dealing and transparency expected under Singaporean real estate law. Another incorrect approach would be to inform the buyer that they cannot proceed with the transaction due to the relationship without first consulting the seller. While seemingly cautious, this preemptively denies the seller the opportunity to consider the situation and provide instructions, potentially undermining the seller's right to make informed decisions about their property sale. This fails to uphold the salesperson's primary obligation to their client. A further incorrect approach would be to inform the seller and then proceed to negotiate a lower price for the buyer, believing it to be a gesture of goodwill. This is professionally unacceptable because it moves beyond disclosure and into active negotiation that benefits one party over the other, without explicit, informed consent from the seller for such a specific action. It constitutes a breach of the salesperson's duty to secure the best possible terms for the seller. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, client interests, and regulatory compliance. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the conflict. 2. Disclose the conflict to all relevant parties, especially the client. 3. Seek clear, written instructions from the client on how to proceed. 4. Act strictly in accordance with those instructions, ensuring all actions are documented. Question 13. Process analysis reveals a real estate salesperson in Singapore is facilitating the sale of a landed property. The vendor has agreed to a price, and the prospective buyer has indicated strong interest and is ready to pay a deposit. However, during the final discussion, the buyer mentions a desire for a slightly earlier completion date than initially discussed, and the vendor verbally agrees to this change. The salesperson, eager to close the deal, prepares an offer to purchase document that reflects the agreed price and deposit but leaves the completion date blank, stating it will be mutually agreed upon later. Which of the following approaches best ensures the enforceability of the contract and upholds professional standards in Singapore? Option A. Proceed with the offer to purchase as drafted, with the blank completion date, advising the buyer that this detail can be easily settled after the initial deposit is paid. Option B. Advise the buyer that the verbal agreement on the earlier completion date is sufficient and does not need to be formally documented in the offer to purchase. Option C. Present the offer to purchase with the blank completion date, emphasizing to the buyer that the deposit signifies their commitment and that minor details like the completion date are usually flexible. Option D. Ensure the offer to purchase clearly states the revised, mutually agreed upon completion date, or a defined period within which it will be finalized, and that all other essential terms are explicitly detailed. The correct answer is D. Ensure the offer to purchase clearly states the revised, mutually agreed upon completion date, or a defined period within which it will be finalized, and that all other essential terms are explicitly detailed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a salesperson's duty to their client and the desire to secure a sale. The salesperson must navigate the legal requirements for a valid contract, while also upholding ethical standards and ensuring transparency. Misinterpreting or misapplying the elements of a contract can lead to legal disputes, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties understand their obligations and that the agreement is legally sound and enforceable under Singaporean law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring all essential elements of a contract are clearly understood and agreed upon by both the vendor and the prospective buyer before any legally binding commitment is made. This includes a clear offer, unequivocal acceptance, consideration, the price, and the intention to create legal relations. Specifically, the salesperson must ensure the offer to purchase clearly states the property details, the price, the deposit amount, and the time frame for exercising the OTP. The buyer's acceptance must be equally clear and unconditional. This approach aligns with the principles of contract law in Singapore, which emphasize mutual consent and clear terms to establish enforceability. It also reflects the ethical duty of a salesperson to act in the best interests of their client by ensuring a legally sound transaction. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale based on a verbal agreement regarding a significant price reduction, without documenting this change in writing within the official offer to purchase. This is problematic because, under Singaporean contract law, while oral contracts can be valid, significant terms like the purchase price are typically expected to be in writing for clarity and enforceability, especially in real estate transactions. Relying solely on a verbal agreement for price modification creates ambiguity and a high risk of disputes, potentially rendering the contract unenforceable or leading to litigation over the agreed price. It also fails to meet the professional standard of diligent record-keeping and transparent communication. Another incorrect approach is to present the buyer with a standard offer to purchase form that contains vague terms regarding the completion date, assuming it can be clarified later. This is professionally unacceptable as it violates the principle of certainty in contract formation. A contract must have sufficiently definite terms to be enforceable. A vague completion date leaves room for significant disagreement and can be a ground for the contract to be deemed void for uncertainty. It also demonstrates a lack of diligence in protecting the client's interests by not ensuring all critical terms are clearly defined from the outset. A third incorrect approach is to advise the buyer that the deposit paid is merely a token of interest and not legally binding, especially if the buyer later withdraws from the purchase. This misrepresents the legal nature of a deposit in a real estate transaction in Singapore. A deposit typically signifies the buyer's serious intent and forms part of the consideration for the sale. If the contract is validly formed and the buyer defaults, the vendor is usually entitled to forfeit the deposit. Misleading the buyer about the legal implications of the deposit can lead to ethical breaches and potential legal repercussions for the salesperson and their agency. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize clarity, transparency, and adherence to legal requirements. When dealing with real estate contracts, this means ensuring all essential elements are present, clearly defined, and documented in writing. A systematic approach involving thorough client consultation, accurate representation of legal obligations, and meticulous documentation is crucial. Professionals should always seek to understand the specific legal framework governing their transactions and act with integrity to protect all parties involved. If there is any doubt about the enforceability or interpretation of a contract term, seeking legal advice or clarifying with all parties involved is paramount. Question 14. Operational review demonstrates that a Singaporean real estate salesperson is assisting a prospective tenant in viewing a property. The tenant expresses a strong preference for a one-year lease term, citing personal circumstances. However, the landlord's stated preference, as communicated to the salesperson, is for a 2-year lease term. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to ensure compliance with Singaporean real estate regulations and ethical practice? Option A. Present the lease agreement to the tenant with a 1-year term, assuming the landlord will eventually agree to it to secure a tenant. Option B. Advise the tenant to accept the 2-year lease term as it is the landlord's preference, without further discussion or exploration of the tenant's needs. Option C. Clearly communicate the landlord's preference for a 2-year lease term to the tenant, and facilitate a negotiation or discussion between the tenant and landlord to reach a mutually agreeable lease term. Option D. Unilaterally amend the lease agreement to reflect a 2-year term and present it to the tenant for signature, assuming this is what the landlord desires. The correct answer is C. Clearly communicate the landlord's preference for a 2-year lease term to the tenant and facilitate a negotiation or discussion between the tenant and landlord to reach a mutually agreeable lease term. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Singaporean real estate salesperson due to the potential for misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. The salesperson must navigate the client's desire for a specific lease term against the landlord's stated preference, ensuring transparency and adherence to the Estate Agents Act and its subsidiary legislation. Failure to do so could lead to disciplinary action by the Council for Estate Agencies. C. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly communicating the landlord's preference for a 2-year lease term to the prospective tenant, while also highlighting the tenant's stated preference for a 1-year term. The salesperson should then facilitate a direct discussion or negotiation between the tenant and the landlord, or their appointed agent, to reach a mutually agreeable lease term. This approach upholds the salesperson's duty of care and honesty to both parties, as mandated by the Estate Agents Act, which requires agents to act in the best interests of their clients and to avoid making misleading statements. It ensures that all parties are fully informed and have the opportunity to negotiate terms, preventing potential disputes and upholding professional integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting the lease agreement with a 1-year term without explicitly informing the tenant of the landlord's preference for 2 years would be a misrepresentation. This violates the salesperson's duty to provide accurate information and could lead the tenant to believe the landlord has agreed to their preferred term, creating a false expectation. This contravenes the principles of fair dealing and honesty expected under Singaporean real estate regulations. Another unacceptable approach would be to unilaterally amend the lease agreement to reflect the 2-year term without the tenant's explicit consent or confirmation. This action exceeds the salesperson's authority and constitutes a material alteration of the proposed agreement without proper authorization, potentially leading to legal complications and a breach of trust. Finally, advising the tenant to simply accept the 2-year term because it is what the landlord wants, without exploring the tenant's own needs or facilitating negotiation, demonstrates a failure to represent the tenant's interests adequately. This neglects the salesperson's obligation to act diligently and in the best interests of the client they are representing in the transaction, which in this context appears to be the tenant seeking a property. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a transparent and facilitative approach. When presented with differing preferences between parties, the salesperson's role is to act as an honest intermediary. This involves clearly articulating each party's position, identifying potential areas of conflict or compromise, and facilitating communication to achieve a resolution. The salesperson must always prioritize accurate information dissemination and ensure that all parties provide informed consent for any agreed-upon terms, thereby adhering to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that a real estate salesperson in Singapore is advising a client on a potential property investment. Considering the current economic climate in Singapore, characterized by rising interest rates and a projected slowdown in economic growth, which of the following approaches best reflects responsible professional practice? Option A. Focusing solely on the client's immediate desire to purchase a property without discussing broader economic influences or potential market risks. Option B. Emphasizing the historical trend of property price appreciation in Singapore and projecting a continued upward trajectory, downplaying the impact of current economic challenges. Option C. Presenting a balanced overview of how current economic factors like interest rates and economic growth projections might influence property market trends, and advising the client to consider these factors in their investment decision. Option D. Guaranteeing a specific percentage increase in property value within the next 2 years, based on the client's expressed desire for a high return. The correct answer is C. presenting a balanced overview of how current economic factors like interest rates and economic growth projections might influence property market trends, and advising the client to consider these factors in their investment decision. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to navigate the complex interplay between economic indicators and their impact on property values, while adhering to ethical and regulatory obligations. The salesperson must provide advice that is both accurate and responsible, avoiding speculation or misleading statements. Careful judgment is required to interpret economic data and translate it into actionable insights for clients without overstepping professional boundaries or making guarantees. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of relevant economic factors impacting the Singapore property market, such as interest rate trends, inflation, employment figures, and government housing policies. This analysis should then be used to inform clients about potential market shifts and their implications for their investment decisions. This is correct because it aligns with the Council for Estate Agencies (C) guidelines, which emphasize the importance of providing accurate and relevant information to clients. Salespersons are expected to be knowledgeable about market trends and to assist clients in making informed decisions based on objective data, rather than personal opinions or unsubstantiated predictions. This approach upholds professional integrity and client trust. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on past property price appreciation and project a continuation of this trend, without considering current or future economic headwinds. This is professionally unacceptable, as it ignores the dynamic nature of the real estate market and fails to account for potential risks. It could lead clients to make ill-advised investment decisions based on an incomplete or overly optimistic picture, potentially violating the CEA's requirement for salespersons to act in the best interests of their clients and to provide advice that is sound and well-founded. Another incorrect approach would be to make definitive predictions about future property prices, such as guaranteeing a specific percentage increase within a given time frame. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Real estate markets are subject to numerous unpredictable factors, and guaranteeing future performance is misleading and constitutes a misrepresentation. Such an approach violates the principle of honesty and transparency expected of licensed salespersons and could expose both the salesperson and the client to significant financial risk. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to dismiss the impact of economic factors altogether, focusing only on the client's immediate desire to buy or sell without providing context. This demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and market awareness. Salespersons have a duty to educate their clients and to provide a comprehensive understanding of the market environment, including economic influences, to facilitate informed decision-making. Failing to do so neglects the salesperson's responsibility to act with competence and due care. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve: first, understanding the client's objectives; second, conducting a comprehensive analysis of relevant market data, including economic indicators specific to Singapore; third, synthesizing this information to provide a balanced perspective on potential market movements, highlighting both opportunities and risks; and fourth, communicating this information clearly and ethically to the client, empowering them to make their own informed decisions. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that a property agent in Singapore is advising a client on the purchase of a residential property. The agent has observed a recent uptick in property prices in a particular district over the past 6 months. Which of the following approaches best reflects a responsible assessment of real estate cycles and trends for this client? Option A. Recommending the client invest heavily in the district based on the agent's personal belief that property values will continue to rise indefinitely. Option B. Analyzing a broad range of Singapore-specific economic indicators, recent government policy announcements related to property, and historical price movements in that district and comparable areas to form a balanced projection of future market conditions. Option C. Focusing solely on the recent 6-month price increase in the district, highlighting it as a strong indicator of continued rapid appreciation. Option D. Emphasizing that past performance is the only reliable predictor of future real estate trends, and advising the client to ignore any broader economic or policy factors. The correct answer is B. Analyzing a broad range of Singapore-specific economic indicators, recent government policy announcements related to property, and historical price movements in that district and comparable areas to form a balanced projection of future market conditions. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that understanding real estate cycles and trends is crucial for property agents in Singapore to provide informed advice to clients. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires agents to interpret complex market data and translate it into actionable insights for clients, while also managing client expectations and potential biases. A failure to accurately assess or communicate these trends can lead to poor investment decisions for clients and damage the agent's reputation. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive analysis of current and historical market data specific to Singapore's property market. This includes examining factors such as interest rates, government policies, e.g., cooling measures, grants, economic indicators, GDP growth, employment rates, and supply-demand dynamics for different property segments, e.g., HDB, private condominiums, commercial properties. The agent should then synthesize this information to provide a balanced outlook on potential future trends, highlighting both opportunities and risks. This aligns with the Council for Estate Agencies (C) guidelines, which emphasize the importance of agents acting in the best interests of their clients and providing accurate, relevant information. Ethical practice dictates transparency and diligence in market analysis. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or recent sales figures, without considering broader economic and policy influences. This fails to provide a holistic view and could lead to misinformed advice, potentially contravening the CEA's requirement for agents to be competent and knowledgeable. Another incorrect approach is to present an overly optimistic or pessimistic outlook without substantiating it with data. This can be seen as misleading and does not serve the client's best interests, violating ethical obligations to provide objective advice. Furthermore, ignoring the impact of specific Singaporean government policies on the property market demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an incomplete understanding of the local context, which is a critical failure in professional practice. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes data-driven analysis, objective assessment, and clear, transparent communication. This involves continuously updating market knowledge, understanding the interplay of various economic and policy factors, and tailoring advice to individual client circumstances and risk appetites. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates a landlord in Singapore expressing frustration with a tenant who is consistently late with rent payments and has indicated they may not renew their lease. The landlord wishes to regain possession of the property as soon as possible. Which of the following actions by the real estate salesperson best aligns with Singaporean property law and ethical professional conduct? Option A. Advise the landlord that the only legal recourse is to serve the tenant with a formal notice to quit, and if the tenant fails to vacate, to apply to the courts for an order for possession, while also suggesting the landlord consult with a legal professional for guidance on the specific notice periods and court procedures. Option B. Advise the landlord to inform the tenant that their tenancy is immediately terminated due to late rent payments and that they must vacate within 24 hours. Option C. Suggest the landlord change the locks to the property while the tenant is out to prevent further unauthorized occupation. Option D. Recommend the landlord start removing the tenant's personal belongings from the property to encourage them to leave quickly. Correct answer is A. Advise the landlord that the only legal recourse is to serve the tenant with a formal notice to quit, and if the tenant fails to vacate, to apply to the courts for an order for possession, while also suggesting the landlord consult with a legal professional for guidance on the specific notice periods and court procedures. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of the Singaporean landlord-tenant laws, specifically concerning the eviction process. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson to navigate the delicate balance between a landlord's desire to regain possession of their property and the tenant's legal rights. Misinterpreting or misapplying the eviction procedures can lead to significant legal repercussions for both the landlord and the salesperson, including fines, lawsuits, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions taken are compliant with the Residential Property Act and any relevant tenancy agreements. The best professional approach involves adhering strictly to the legal framework for eviction in Singapore. This means understanding that a landlord cannot unilaterally evict a tenant. The process requires formal legal steps, typically involving serving the tenant with a notice to quit, and if the tenant does not vacate, applying to the courts for an order for possession. A salesperson's role is to advise the landlord on these legal requirements and facilitate the process through authorized channels, rather than engaging in any actions that could be construed as harassment or illegal eviction. This approach is correct because it upholds the law, protects the rights of all parties involved, and maintains the salesperson's professional integrity and compliance with the Council for Estate Agencies (C) guidelines, an approach that involves the salesperson directly communicating with the tenant to pressure them into vacating, without following the formal legal notice and court order process, is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the legal safeguards in place for tenants and could be considered harassment or an illegal act under Singaporean law. Such actions would violate the salesperson's duty of care and ethical obligations, potentially leading to disciplinary action from the CEA. Another unacceptable approach is for the salesperson to advise the landlord to change the locks or remove the tenant's belongings while the tenant is absent. This constitutes an illegal eviction and a serious breach of property law in Singapore. It disregards the tenant's right to peaceful possession of the property and can result in severe legal penalties for the landlord and disciplinary action for the salesperson. Finally, advising the landlord to simply terminate the tenancy agreement without proper notice or a court order, even if the lease term has expired, is also incorrect. While a lease may expire, the tenant's right to occupy the premises continues until a formal eviction process is completed or the tenant voluntarily vacates. Failure to follow the prescribed legal procedures can lead to the tenant remaining in possession or seeking legal recourse against the landlord and the salesperson. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a thorough understanding of the Residential Property Act and its provisions regarding tenancy and eviction. When faced with a landlord seeking to evict a tenant, a salesperson must first ascertain the legal grounds for eviction. They should then clearly explain the mandatory legal steps to the landlord, emphasizing that self-help remedies or informal pressures are not permissible. If the landlord insists on pursuing an eviction, the salesperson should advise them to seek legal counsel from a qualified lawyer to ensure all actions are compliant with Singaporean law. The salesperson's role is to facilitate the legal process, not to circumvent it. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a real estate salesperson in Singapore is evaluating multiple prospective tenants for a rental property. Which of the following screening and selection processes best upholds both the landlord's interests and regulatory compliance? Option A. Rejecting applicants based on their ethnicity or nationality if the landlord expresses a preference for tenants of a particular background. Option B. Inquiring about the prospective tenant's marital status and future family plans to gauge their perceived long-term stability in the area. Option C. Declining to rent to an applicant solely because they have a visible disability, without assessing their ability to meet the tenancy obligations. Option D. Verifying the prospective tenant's employment status and income to assess financial capacity, checking references from previous landlords for rental history and property care, and confirming identity. Correct answer is D. Verifying the prospective tenant's employment status and income to assess financial capacity, checking references from previous landlords for rental history and property care, and confirming identity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate salesperson in Singapore must balance the landlord's desire for a reliable tenant with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices. The Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA, in Singapore governs the collection, use, and disclosure of personal data. And while landlords have a legitimate interest in assessing a tenant's ability to pay rent and maintain the property, the screening process must not lead to unfair or unlawful discrimination based on protected characteristics. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the information sought and the criteria used for selection are relevant to the tenancy and do not violate privacy or anti-discrimination principles. The best approach involves a structured tenant screening process that focuses on objective, verifiable criteria directly related to the tenancy. This includes verifying the prospective tenant's identity, employment status, and income to assess their financial capacity to pay rent. It also involves checking references from previous landlords to gauge their history of rent payment and property care. This method is correct because it adheres to the principles of the PDPA, by collecting only necessary personal data for a legitimate purpose, assessing tenancy suitability, and avoids making decisions based on protected characteristics. It aligns with ethical real estate practice by ensuring fairness and transparency in the selection process. An approach that involves asking prospective tenants about their marital status and family plans to gauge their perceived stability is professionally unacceptable. This is because such questions can lead to indirect discrimination based on gender or family status, which are protected characteristics. The PDPA, while not explicitly listing all protected characteristics for tenancy, emphasizes the need for data to be collected for a specific, legitimate purpose, and not used in a way that is inconsistent with that purpose. Furthermore, making assumptions about a tenant's reliability based on marital status or family plans is subjective and potentially discriminatory. Another unacceptable approach is to reject a prospective tenant solely based on their ethnicity or nationality, even if the landlord expresses a preference for tenants of a certain background. This constitutes direct discrimination and is a violation of fundamental ethical principles and potentially other unwritten guidelines promoting fair housing. While the PDPA focuses on data privacy, the broader ethical framework for real estate agents in Singapore mandates fair dealing and prohibits discriminatory practices. Finally, an approach that involves rejecting a tenant because they have a visible disability without assessing their ability to meet the tenancy obligations is also professionally unacceptable. This is discriminatory and potentially violates the spirit of inclusivity and fair treatment. The focus should always be on the individual's capacity to fulfill the terms of the lease agreement, not on assumptions or biases related to their personal circumstances. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment, legal compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves developing standardized screening criteria that are applied consistently to all applicants, focusing on financial capacity, rental history, and references. Any information collected must be relevant to the tenancy and handled in accordance with the PDPA. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel or the Council for Estate Agencies, c. guidelines is advisable to ensure compliance and uphold professional standards. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a potential client in Singapore wishes to purchase a property valued at $1,000,000. The client has a gross monthly income, GMI, of $8,000 and existing monthly loan repayments of $500. Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, has a total debt servicing ratio, TDSR, threshold of 55% for new housing loans, assuming a loan tenure of 30 years and an interest rate of 3.5% per annum. What is the maximum monthly loan repayment the client can afford? And consequently, what is the maximum loan quantum they can secure, considering the TDSR? Option A. Maximum monthly loan repayment of $400, leading to a maximum loan quantum of approximately $924,000. Option B. Maximum monthly loan repayment of $3,000, leading to a maximum loan quantum of approximately $630,000. Option C. Maximum monthly loan repayment of $400, leading to a maximum loan quantum of approximately $1,000,000. Option D. Maximum monthly loan repayment of $4,900, leading to a maximum loan quantum of approximately $1,029,000. The correct answer is A. Maximum monthly loan repayment of $400, leading to a maximum loan quantum of approximately $924,000. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Singapore to balance the client's immediate financial needs with the lender's risk assessment and regulatory compliance. The salesperson must understand the implications of various loan-to-value (LTV) ratios and their impact on mortgage servicing ratios (MSR), while also adhering to the Monetary Authority of Singapore (MAS) guidelines on responsible lending. Miscalculating these figures or misrepresenting them to the client can lead to significant financial repercussions for the client and potential disciplinary action for the salesperson. The best approach involves accurately calculating the maximum allowable loan amount based on the client's income and the property's valuation, considering the MAS total debt servicing ratio (TDSR) framework. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and the client's long-term financial stability. Specifically, it requires calculating the gross monthly income, GMI, the maximum allowable monthly debt repayment based on the TDSR threshold, currently 55% for new housing loans, and then determining the maximum loan quantum. An incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the maximum LTV without considering the TDSR. This fails to comply with MAS regulations, as it could result in a loan that the borrower cannot sustainably service, leading to potential default. Another incorrect approach is to use a simplified MSR calculation that ignores the impact of other existing debts, which is also non-compliant with the TDSR framework and misrepresents the client's true borrowing capacity. Finally, an approach that prioritizes securing the highest possible loan amount for the client without a thorough TDSR assessment, even if it appears to maximize the immediate sale, disregards the ethical obligation to ensure the client's financial well-being and contravenes MAS guidelines on responsible lending. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's financial profile and the property's valuation. This is followed by a rigorous application of the MAS TDSR framework to determine the maximum sustainable loan amount. Any calculations should be transparently communicated to the client, highlighting the assumptions made and the potential risks. If the client's desired loan amount exceeds the TDSR limit, the salesperson should advise on alternative strategies or realistic expectations, rather than attempting to circumvent regulations.